Ladies and gentlemen, I have to start out by being honest with you. On this episode, we're not going to talk about insurance and we're not going to talk about the law. Instead, we have a very special show for you today. We're going to be talking about life and show business, comedy, Frank Sinatra, because our special guest, as you can see, is the handsome man on the screen, the legendary comedian himself, Tom Dressen. And Tom is one of the all-time great stand-up comedians. He's been on more than 500 programs nationally during the course of his 50-plus year career. He's been on the Tonight Show as much as anybody, more than 60 appearances with Johnny Carson. He's friends with David Letterman and was one of David's favorite guests. But also, when David was out for a period of time, he called upon Tommy to host the show. And most important to me, and I think probably the best gig you can get, Tom, is opening for Frank Sinatra for the last 13 or 14 years of his career. Thank you so much for joining us, Tommy.
Scotty, I'm happy to do it, but probably the highlight of my career was when you introduced me in Chicago, so I had to follow you, and that wasn't easy. That really was very difficult, but I somehow trudged my way through it.
Well, you know, I'm a struggling comedian, and that was the big break for me. And later on, we'll maybe show a picture of me opening for you. It was a great thrill. And I have to tell you, Tom wrote this book. It came out last June. It's called My Journey from Still Standing, My Journey from Streets and Saloons to Stage and Sinatra. And it's a fabulous book, Tom, because it goes through your career in show business. Even more interesting to me, it talks about your life growing up. And so I'd like to spend a couple minutes on it. But not only did I read it and thoroughly enjoy it, I tripped over the damn thing 2 or 3 times because my wife, Charlene, when she got it, she said, you know, this book is really good. I want to share it. So she bought a couple dozen copies for some friends, and it stayed in the boxes for, you know, a couple weeks. And then, you know, there was the second round because everybody loved it so much. So thank you for writing it and really sharing your story with everybody. And as great as it is, you left room for a sequel because you have a lot of great stories to tell.
Well, yeah, it was really all my career in show business. Whenever I'd be somewhere where something very funny happened or something very poignant, that I would go back to my room that night and I would write it down. I would journal, you know, this moment that a little kid from Harvey, Illinois, never dreamed he'd be in sometimes this rarefied air, you know. So I just journaled, and I thought, well, one day it'll be the stories I can tell my children or my grandchildren. And as it turns out, about 2 years ago, a couple guys called me with a publisher, you know, and they said, we are interested very much in doing your life story. And I said, well, I've already written it, you know. So they helped me with the narrative. My good friends Darren Grubb and John Russo, and we finished the book. And it was after I finished the book, I thought, I don't know who wants to read this, you know, but it turns out that it's just been fantastic. I've got over 150 5-star reviews on Amazon now, and people every day contact me. I'm doing interviews every day about the book. I should have been on a book tour, but the COVID thing has kept me back here in California, so I couldn't go out on tour. But I'm looking forward to it. It's basically, if anybody asks you about the book, it's basically simply this: a young boy, 9, 10 years old, carrying a shoe shine box through the snow in Harvey, Illinois, a suburb on the south side of Chicago, going from tavern to tavern, getting on his hands and knees, shining shoes in these bars to make money to help feed his brothers and sisters. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and we lived in a shack. We were real poor. And while he's shining shoes in all these bars, Frank Sinatra is singing on the jukeboxes. And that little boy, flash forward, one day is carrying Frank Sinatra's coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California. So it's that journey, my journey from streets and saloons to the stage and Sinatra, and all the funny things that happen in between, and also some of the tough, hard times. The book is called Still Standing because of a double entendre. I've been a stand-up comedian 51 years, and I'm still standing, but I was knocked down a lot in my life too, physically knocked down. As you know, you read the book, and I got back up again. And that's what the book is about.
And you have to tell me who these guys are. Darren Grubbs and Johnny Russo, because either they're a couple guys you liked and did a favor for by including them on the book, or they are two very talented authors, because when you read the book, it's 100% in your voice. You know, I've heard you tell some of the stories, and Tom Dressen, your mannerisms, your word choices, it's definitely 100% you.
Yeah, and that's one of the deals. When they said that they first wanted to write a book about my life, and I told them I had already written all these chapters, and I sent it to them, and I said, I want, if I put a book out, it's going to be my words, everything in my words, because I don't want ever anyone to come up to me and say, you know, I read what you said this, and then I would say, I didn't say that. Well, it's your book, you said it, you know. So they agreed to that. They helped me with the narrative. Yeah, so Scott, let me tell you a great David Letterman story, because it has a lot to do with Chicago, with Illinois. He called me about 2 months ago and he said, Tom, you know, every time you do an interview or I do an interview and people say, how did we meet? We always tell the same story, that you came off stage one night at the Comedy Store when we were brand new back in the 70s. And I had seen your set, and I was out in the parking lot and I complimented you on your set. And you and I started a conversation, and we've been friends ever since. I said, yeah, that's true. He said, yeah, but it's boring. I said, well, I'm sorry, but it's true. He said, but it's a boring story. He said, from now on, let's tell people you came off stage, and I just came into Los Angeles from Indianapolis, and I was out in the parking lot, and you came off stage, and I had seen your set, and I stole some material from you, and you beat the hell out of me in the parking lot. I said, now, why would I tell a story like that? He said, because it's a better story. I said, Dave, you got 32 million fans. They're going to be chasing me through airports. He said, I don't care. It's a better story. Now, 2 weeks go by, and he calls me and he said, do you know the governor of Illinois? And I said, no, I met him once, but I don't know him. He said, well, my wife, Regina, has a friend who lives in Chicago, and she has an adult son who's autistic. And these adult autistic folks, they have like some land where they plant corn and beans and tomatoes and stuff like that. And then when it comes into fruition, they give it to the homeless. And he said, and now the state is going to come and I guess take that property away. So he said, I'd like to talk to the governor. I said, gee, I don't know him, but I know John Culbertson, the Senate, president of the Senate, Illinois General Assembly. I said, let me call John. I called John Culbertson, and John said, oh, Tom, I know all about that. It's being taken care of. Tell Dave not to worry about it. I said, would you call, if I could give Dave your number, would you explain it to Dave? Because he was talking about a statute and stuff like that. And he said, sure, I'll talk to Dave. I said, oh, by the way, John, when you tell Dave that you're helping him, tell him the reason you're helping him is because Dressen beat the hell out of him in the parking lot at the Comedy Store. And he said, okay. He said, John's a good guy and a good sport. He said, okay, now 10 minutes go by and my phone rings and it's Letterman. I pick up the phone. He said, didn't I tell you that's a better story? I told you that's a better story. So, typical David Letterman.
Typical David Letterman, but also, you know, you wrote in your book a little bit about how, you know, some guys once in a while on the circuit were known for stealing materials. And, you know, that's a horror story for a comedian, because you come up with great material and then it's never yours again. It's always the guy who got it out there.
Yeah, that's the one. See, you can't copyright, as you know, you can't copyright comedy material, you know. So you come up, especially in the day, in 1975, wherever you went in America, people say, what do you do for a living? Say, I'm a stand-up comedian. The next question out of their mouth was, oh yeah, have you ever been on Johnny Carson? And if you hadn't been on Johnny Carson, in the eyes of America, you weren't a stand-up comedian. So how do you get on Johnny Carson? We're in the business. It's called show business. So, you know, the business side of it was you'd watch the Tonight Show and say, what kind of material are those comedians doing? And Johnny didn't want two guys going to bar jokes. He wanted original monologues. So you had to keep coming up with fresh and original material. And as you pointed out, I did 61 appearances on that show. And that's a lot of material that you have to keep coming up with. Well, if somebody stole your material and did it on national television, it almost became theirs, even though it wasn't fair. There was nothing you could do about it. I would do the Tonight Show, and writers across the land, I would be on like 11:30 at night. Guys who write material for disc jockeys in Lubbock, Texas, in Bangor, Maine, you know, in Omaha, Nebraska, they would, you know, type up your material and sell it to a disc jockey the following morning. And the disc jockey would be doing your jokes, you know, especially if they were relevant or topical jokes. You know? So there's nothing you can do about it. And it really, and there were people that would come to the Comedy Store or even the Vegas when I was working Vegas stuff, and they'd see your material. They would either write it down or tape record it, bring a tape recorder with them, and then sell it or use it themselves. And you can't do anything about that. I tell young comedians, don't worry about that. They can't steal your personality and they can't steal your timing.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I tell people a lot of times, well, legal writing is the toughest writing because you're writing for an audience that wants to tear what you say apart, whether it's opposing counsel or the court. But when I thought about it further, writing comedy is very difficult. I mean, to be a great comedian or a comedy writer, you have to be intelligent, you have to be perceptive, because it's a lot easier to write something in a straight factual way than to be able to make it funny, isn't it?
Well, yeah, when you're writing a joke, you're absolutely right in that assessment. But when you're writing a joke, if you can simplify it, comedy is basically two things when you're writing a joke. Number one, it's 9/10 surprise. The audience laughs because they didn't think you were going to say that. So the setup line has to hide the punchline. And the other rule is there are no victimless jokes. Who's the victim in this joke? You, the society, your daughter's dating a punk rocker, the government, the airlines, somebody's the butt of the joke. And again, the setup line has to hide the punchline. A joke, you've heard me do this. It's always gotten a big laugh from me and throughout my career. And it's from a true story. The joke was, I said, I went back to a school reunion. I saw one of my teachers and he came up to me, he said, "You don't remember me," but I said, "Yes, I do. Your name is Richard Bruno and you teach algebra." He said, "That's amazing." I said, "Listen to this. X to the 5th power times X to the 5th power is X to the 10th power. Because in algebra, you don't multiply exponents, you add them." He said, "That's incredible." I said, "You know what else is incredible? That's the first time I've ever been able to use that since you taught it to me."
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right.
That joke always got a laugh, but you didn't see it coming.
Oh.
And it came from basically a true story. Richard Bruno was my teacher, and you just find a way to hide the punchline till the very last second.
What is it that lets you know or you have an inkling as to whether somebody's going to be successful in comedy? What is the it factor?
In comedy?
Yeah.
It's again, a personality, somebody who's happy to be there, and you see that, that they enjoy what they're doing. So of course, material is important, but delivery and timing. I can teach you a lot of things about stand-up comedy, and I help young comedians all the time. I'm a motivational speaker. Aside from being a stand-up comedian, I give motivation talks to corporate America and to high schools and colleges on 4 subjects: perception, visualization, self-talk, and develop a sense of humor. And I elaborate on those 4 points. But to comedians, I give a motivation talk called "The Joy of Stand-Up Comedy and How to Get There." Because there's so many negative people in our business. I've known 5 guys who committed suicide in my life, good stand-up comedians. There's a lot of unhappy people that come into comedy. I've always said 85% of all stand-up comedians that I've met in my life, this is my opinion, 85% of all stand-up comedians are insecure, neurotic, sometimes psychotic, love-starved wrecks. Absolute wrecks. And the other 15% are gifted, confident people who say, "I know how to write a joke and I know how to tell a joke." I like to think I'm in the latter, but never trust somebody who tells you they're sane,
Right.
Anyhow, so I tell the kids, I can teach you a lot about stand-up comedy, joke structure, stage presence, mic technique. I can't teach you timing. You either have it or you don't. And if you dissect comedy, it gets boring, but basically timing is, if I were to, when I give a class, sometimes I'll say there's a pond of water in front of you and you have a rock in your hand and you throw that rock as high as you can in the air, and the rock goes all the way in the air and comes all the way down and hits the pond and then ripples across the pond. Let's say that's laughter. When that rock is on its way up, you never move on your next line because you'd be stepping on your own laugh. When I was with a comedy team, Tim and Tom, as you know, that's one thing you had to really be careful of. When that laughter was rising, your partner may have gotten a huge laugh at that. If you move on your line right away, you just stepped on his laugh. So I say some nights when I'm on stage, you never move on your next line when the rock is on its way up. Some nights when it's starting to come down, I move on the next line. Some nights I let it go halfway. Some nights I let it hit the pond. And some nights I'd hit the pond and ripple all the way across before I move. I can't tell you what I'm going to do before I go on because I haven't read the audience yet. Every audience is different. And so that timing of knowing when to move on the next line. Jack Benny was one of my favorite comedians when I was growing up because he had impeccable timing.
Yeah, and he had those gestures, and just, one gesture from Jack, would send the crowd going off.
He knew when to pause and wait for that other laugh to come flying in. He just had that incredible timing. The other thing too is why I love Jack Benny. A person is an artist in any endeavor. If you're a truck driver, a bricklayer, a bartender, whatever you are, if you make your work look, one word, effortless. Jack Benny made comedy look easy. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, I can do that. No, you can't. He just made it look like you could. A good.
And by the way, most people don't know this, but you have an outstanding voice. You come to Wrigley Field every year and do the seventh inning stretch. But you may be the only person in history that did a duet with Frank Sinatra on Strangers in the Night.
Well, everybody has done. He had that duets album. I didn't sing on any album with him, and thank you. But you're being very kind. I don't have an outstanding voice.
You did it in the car.
Well, in the car, yeah. One night at singing at Frank's compound, and that's in the book, and that's a great recall on your part. He would come and get me some nights when I stayed at his compound. He had this huge compound down in Rancho Mirage in Palm Springs area. And on the outer perimeters of his compound were bungalows where the house guests stayed. They were called New York, New York, Strangers in the Night, Tender Trap, My Way, named after his songs. And he would come and get me some nights. Let's take a ride, Tommy. And he went to bed when the sun came up. Whether we were on the road or off the road, he went to bed when the sun came up. He was nocturnal. But one particular night, riding in the car with him, he told me a very personal story as we're riding around. And then after he said it, told me the story, he said, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have told you that. I said, well, I won't go any further than this car. He said, I know, but I just shouldn't have told you that. And I said, well, like I say, it's not going to go any further than the car. And by the way, we're not strangers, we're friends. And he said, yeah, I know. And I don't know what made me do it. I'm driving the car and I looked at him and I said, strangers in the night, exchanging glances. He said, oh, for God's sake, if you're going to sing that song, get in key, And then he went, strangers in the night. And I said, exchanging glances. He said, wandering in the night. And we sang the song back and forth. As we pulled into the compound, security let us in this compound. We got out of the car and he always socked me on the jaw. He'd say, love you, pal. Good night, Tommy. He'd sock me on the jaw. Love you, pal. And I was walking back to my bungalow and said, if I were to go back to Harvey, Illinois and tell all the guys back there in the bar, I just riding around with Frank and we were singing Strangers in the Night, they'd say, get the hell out of here with that BS. But it happened. It happened. And it's a memory I'll never forget.
We'll talk more about Frank as we go on, but a couple of points I wanted to get to. First was, growing up in Harvey, and I found this part of the book fascinating because I didn't know a lot of this. But what about growing up the way you did in Harvey, made you who you are, but also made you really somebody who turns out to be very compatible with Frank Sinatra?
Well, again, I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack. At one time, there was 5 of us in a big bed. It was sleep across the bed. You had holes in your shoes. You put cardboard in it. If a window broke, you stuck a rag in it. We were raggedy poor, and again, I shined shoes in taverns, set pins in bowling alleys, caddied in the summertime, sold newspapers on the corner, had a paper route. All of this to help feed my brothers and sisters. And none of this do I regret. It helped build a character, a little bit of character in me that whenever the going got tough, like the cliche goes, I got going, And so also I hung around saloons. My mother was a bartender in the saloon that my uncle owned, and I would go to all these saloons and shine shoes. And I'd go to my mom's tavern, or my mom was a bartender last, waiting for the shifts to change in the factory. And I'd go back out again. While I was in there, sitting there, my uncle would tell jokes behind the bar. His name was Frank Polizzi. And I was fascinated that this guy, with his vocabulary and his inflection, could cause this sound to come out of everybody's body in the room. And it sound like electricity, this laughter throughout the room, and unite all these people. It just fascinated me. And I used to tell some of his jokes that many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, but so also because I grew up around saloons, so did Frank Sinatra. His mom and dad owned a bar called Marty O'Brien's Bar and Grill. His father boxed under the name of Marty O'Brien in Hoboken, because in those days there was so much prejudice against Italians that they changed their name when they boxed, And so his dad had a little bit of popularity in Hoboken area, had won some fights. So when he retired and opened up the bar, it was Marty O'Brien's. And so Frank, as a little boy, there was a Nickelodeon, a piano roll player there, where you would put a nickel in and push the button in, and a roll would come. Well, sometimes the sailors would come in there and play the piano roll, would give Frank a nickel if he'd sing. He was a little boy, and he said he used to stand next to the piano and sing. So we talked about saloons a lot. I called them taverns, he called them saloons. And he called himself a saloon singer his whole life. He would say, when we'd be in Vegas, we'd be at Caesar's, and he said, it's great to be back here in the saloons. He called Caesar's Palace a saloon, which I thought was hysterical, But the New York Times guy once said to him, why do you keep Tom Dreesen around? The guy was out drinking in a place where we were at called Rocky Lee's. And the guy wasn't doing a story, but he just happened to be walking by. And he knew me, and he said hello to me. And then he looked at Frank and jokingly said, why do you keep this guy Tom Dreesen with you all these years? And Frank said, you mean besides the fact that he's funny? And the guy said, yeah, besides the fact that he's funny. He said, well, if I'm a saloon singer, and I am, then Tommy's a saloon comedian. He said, by that, I mean, we're just a couple of neighborhood guys. And I've always treasured that quote, because when I was alone with him in the car, he wasn't the great Frank Sinatra. To me, he was, but he would become a kid from Hoboken, and I was a kid from Harvey. And that's what we talked about.
And, it's sort of interesting because, you come from being, like all of us, a fan of Frank's, and then he's your boss. And then he's sort of like a dad to you. But I think by the end, you guys were just close friends.
Yeah, at first, when you first tour with Frank Sinatra, the Frank Sinatra tour is a big tour. You're going out in front of 20,000 people. In Hawaii, 40,000 people. So everybody better know their job, because he knew his job, and you better know your job. And so at first he was the boss, and he was the boss of this tour. He called all the shots, and then as time went by, he became a buddy, because we'd be hanging out after every show wherever we were. He, like I say, he stayed out till dawn. And so he became like a buddy, and toward the end of his life, more like a father to me. He started giving me good advice about things that I was going through and stuff, and I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral, and I miss him every day of my life. It's hard to describe what it's like being in that rarefied air, flying in his private jet all over the world. You do your show, and then he does his, and you're in the wings, and he finishes with New York, New York, and the crowd's giving him standing ovations. He comes off stage and said, let's go, Tommy. And you jump in the limo, and squad cars and limousines rush you to the private jet. And you're flying over the arena. People aren't even aren't in their cars yet. You're flying over to the next city. You land, and squad cars and limousines rush you to your hotel. It's rarefied air. To be at his compound at night in Rancho Mirage, and the women would all go to bed, and the guys would sit around and talk with Frank. And I'd be sitting there with Gregory Peck and Kirk Douglas and Clint Eastwood and Jack Lemmon and Robert Wagner and Frank. And they're talking film and movies and direction. And I'm looking, these are people I saw in the movies when I was a little boy in Harvey, Illinois, at the Harvey Theater. To be in that rarefied air, it's hard to describe how wonderful that is. And to be accepted, for your talent and for your friendship by those folks, And, being a friend of Frank's is one thing, but you still better know your job. I don't know how many times I've told people in show business this. They said, isn't it who you know in show business? I said, who you know will get you in the door. What you know keeps you in the house.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, great expectations, both from Frank demanding excellence, but the audiences who, as you've said many times, tell the quick story about all the people there and your relationship to them.
Well, I always say, when somebody would say, what's it like opening for Frank Sinatra? I'd say you asked me that question. I said, well, Scotty, here's what it's like opening for Frank Sinatra. I said, there's 20,000 people out there in an arena, say the Nassau Coliseum. or whatever. There's 20,000 people out there, Scotty. And I want you to go out there, and it's in the round now. They're not proscenium in front of you. They're all around you. They're behind you. They're on your left side, your right side, and in front of you. And you got to go out in the middle of the arena, Scotty. I want you to go out there, and for the next 45 minutes, I want you to hold their attention. Oh yeah, Scotty, one more thing. I want you to hold their attention, but I want you to make them laugh for the next 45 minutes. Oh, one other thing, Scotty, I want you to make them laugh when you want them to laugh. I want you to pull the strings on the emotions of 20,000 people. No props, no tricks, no charts, no special arrangement, no orchestra, just you and 20,000 people. And one more thing, Scotty, not one of them came to see you.
That's right. Yep, they were all there to see Frank. And you did this show, I think last maybe June, July, called The Man That Made Sinatra Laugh. And it was another, thing where Charlene invited all of our friends, and everybody had a great time, and you fielded a bunch of questions about touring with Frank. But Frank loved to laugh, and he always surrounded himself with people that made him laugh. And, the key, what maybe back, on the Rat Pack days, it was Joey Bishop. But two guys sort of stand out as people that could make Frank laugh, but also get away with things I don't think anybody else could. You and Don Rickles.
Yeah, and one other guy, Dean Martin.
Dean Martin.
Frank loved Dean Martin. And Dean wouldn't say anything all day long, and then he would lay a line on you till you'd fall on the floor. It'd be the line of the day. He had that clever wit about him. And Frank, there's a couple, I'll tell you, of course, the Don Rickles story that's notorious is that Don was we'll start with me. I made him laugh on stage so many times. He would listen to my material. He'd be in the wings. And if I had new material, which I had to keep coming up with new material because we returned to the same cities every year, he would listen. He'd compliment me on the material that it knew. But one night, we're on the road. We did a bunch of one-nighters, and we flew into Las Vegas. We opened at the Desert Inn, did 2 shows, and now it's 4:30 in the morning, and Frank's going strong. There's about 4 or 5 guys at the table in the back of the restaurant, and Frank is holding court and going strong. And I'm beat. I'm tired. I want to go to bed. So I get up from the table, and I start to go, and he said, hey, where are you going? I said, I'm going to bed. He said, what for? I said, I got to get up early in the morning, go to the cemetery and visit those guys. He said, what guys? I said, all those guys who died trying to stay with you every night. And he roared. Yeah. He made me tell that story all the time. But Rickles, the famous story of Rickles that everybody's heard is that, and Frank used to tell this story, that he met Rickles when Rickles was a new comedian. Rickles wasn't married. He was just a new comedian, like a lounge act. He met him one time. And the second time he sees him, Frank is in a restaurant called Patsy's in New York on West 57th Street. And Rickles has got a girl with him. He's dating. He's a new comedian. And he's sitting with the girl. And the girl looks across from him and says, oh my God, there's Frank Sinatra. And Rickles said, yeah, Frank comes in here all the time. She said, you know Frank Sinatra? And he just barely knew him. He said, yeah, I know Frank. She said, if I could meet Frank Sinatra, I'd do anything. Rickles gets up. He goes across the room. He says to Frank, listen, do you mind? I have a girlfriend that I'm here with, and she's a big fan of you. Would come by and say hello. It would mean a lot. And Frank said, when I finish my meal, I'll stop over your table, Don. He said, okay. And Frank finished. And rather than go up to the front and pay, he walked clear across the room. Frank told me the story. He said, and he goes up, and Rickles is sitting there with the girl. And Frank said, hey, Don, how you doing? And Rickles looked up and he said, not now, Frank. Can't you see I'm with somebody? Yeah. And of course, Frank said, I wanted to take his head and shove it in the soup. But he would do things like that. And then, of course, Dean, the funny story about Dean, we were in Detroit working at the Fox Theater in Detroit, Frank and I, and we did a matinee that day. And then we had to do an evening show. So we went back to his suite and we're watching football. And Frank had been after Dean to use the teleprompters. After they both got old, sometimes they'd forget lyrics to a song, or they would want to break in some new songs that they hadn't sung in years. So if you had a teleprompter there, the audience couldn't tell. Usually it looked like a monitor, it looked like a sound monitor. So Frank was after Dean all the time. Hey, they called each other Dag. Frank was always after him, say, hey, Dag, we got to get these teleprompters. The young rock stars, they have them buttons in their ear where they hear the lyrics and all that. And Dean didn't want to do it. And finally, we're like I say, we're at the Fox Theater, and we're having after our show, we're watching a football game, and the phone rings, and it's Dean Martin's manager, Mort Viner, and he's telling Frank Sinatra's manager, that Dean used the teleprompters last night and he loved them. He came off stage and said, my God booked me on a world tour. These things are wonderful. Frank said, get him on the phone. Get Dean on the phone. And they got Dean on the phone. Frank said, damn it, Dag, I've been telling you he's got the phone in this. And I'm sitting next to Frank. He's, damn it, Dag, I've been telling you for years to use them, teleprompters, and young kids use them all the time. And Dean didn't want to hear it. Dean said, yeah. He said, where you at? And Frank said, hold on one second. He said, Tommy, where are we at? I said, we're in Detroit. He said, we're in Detroit. Dean said, did you have to look in the teleprompter to find out where you were at? And of course, Frank dropped the phone and said, he got me again. He got me again.
But I tell you, those were the days. And, one of the things a lot of people, I guess most people know, Frank was a great civil rights champion. Over the years, he did the house I live in after World War II. Great champion for, Black entertainers who were not allowed to stay in the hotels that they were performing in. And I guess punched a couple people out over the years and refused to perform in those places. But you also were a great civil rights champion. And I think it's sort of important to talk a little bit about in these days, because you were part, and this was really your first break in show business, the first part of your show business career with Tim Reed, who people may remember best as Venus Flytrap from WKRP. Could you talk a little bit about the Tim and Tom days?
Yeah, I never thought I'd ever be in show business. It was the furthest thing from my mind. As I told you, I grew up poor. At age 16, I dropped out of high school. I ended up going into the service at age 17. I was running with a tough crowd, but I was working in bowling alleys and stuff. And at age 17, I got in the Navy. And I spent 4 years in the Navy. I read every book I could find on positive mental attitude. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, A Guide to Confident Living. I read W. Clement Stone's PMA, and Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics, and Think and Grow Rich. And then a book called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy that really helped develop me. But still wandered anyway. Came out of the service after 4 years, married, kids, one child after another, ended up with 3 children. And I'm working construction and wheeling concrete. I'm pouring sidewalks and basements. I'm working for bricklayers. I was a bartender, always in the wintertime in Chicago. As you know, you can't work construction all the time, so I always had a job as a bartender. I helped my brother in the photography business. I was a teamster. I loaded trucks and became a teamster. Then I dropped my card and became management. And these 40 guys that I used to work with, teamster guys from Cicero and tough areas of Chicago, they were now working for me, which was another difficult situation. But anyhow, I just, every job I had, I felt unfulfilled. I'd say, what am I supposed to be doing? This can't be it. I'd be in a bar with my buddies some nights at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. I'd say, I don't belong here, but I didn't know where I belonged. And I actually began to pray. I'd pray, I'd say, God, I don't know what my purpose is in life. Show me what I'm supposed to be doing, because this can't be it. And wandering aimlessly and drinking pretty heavy in those days, like everybody else in my family at one time. And anyhow, I joined a civic group called the JCs, in those days called the Junior Chamber of Commerce. And they worked on civic projects and taught you leadership training programs, how to serve on a committee, how to chair a committee, subcommittees, how to conduct a meeting, Robert's Rules of Order, et cetera, et cetera. And I got very active. And I started attacking, the JCs attacked problems of the community in those days. And one of the biggest problems in our community was young kids using drugs, as it is today. And so I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had, getting the kids laughing, playing records and stuff. And then once they got relaxed, and then planting the seeds of the ills of drug abuse in our particular area. And anyhow, as fate would have it, I proposed this at a JC meeting one night, wanting the JCs to sanction this as a JC project. And at the meeting, I had a buddy named John DeBoer, a white guy, who was going to help me with this project. At that meeting that night, after the JCs agreed to sanction it, this young Black guy comes up to me, had just graduated from Norfolk State College, and EI DuPont recruited him into Chicago as a marketing rep. And so he walked up to me, he said, hey, I just heard your proposal. I'd love to work with you on that project. I said, gee, I already got a guy, but thank you. Again, as fate would have it, was praying in those days. The next day, John DeBoer calls me and said, I can't do that with you. I got a new job, so I can't help you with that. I said, oh, Don, what was that black guy's name? Oh, yeah, Tim Reed. Tim and I sit down together. We work on the project. 2 weeks later in the school systems, the moment I walked in that classroom with Tim, I went, oh, what a blessing, because the children were black and white. It was integrated schools. And when they saw two young guys, a young guy, a young white guy, a young black guy, we got their attention right away. And then we played off of one another, making each other laugh, joining in, getting the kids laughing, playing some records, and then planting the seeds of the drug abuse. Now, the program in those days, they weren't teaching drug education at a college or a high school level, let alone at an elementary school level. The program became very popular in JC publications. In 50 states and in 22 foreign countries, they use it as a model program on how to teach drug education at an elementary school level. One day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom stopped and said, you two guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team. And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us because no one had ever done that before. So we started writing what we thought was material. There were no comedy clubs in those days. There were, just saloons and nightclubs. So we ended up working all black clubs in the North and the South, what they call affectionately the Chitlin circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. And we started working all white nightclubs, and we eventually got on a Playboy circuit. And we stayed together 6 years, got an album out. But we paid dues like no other act ever had to pay. In those days, you got to remember, 1969 and 1975, the world was in turmoil. America was in turmoil. Race riots in every major city in the country, including Harvey, Illinois, by the way. One of the largest riots in the country was in Harvey, and my hometown. And so also the Vietnam War was raging. Students were protesting. America was in turmoil. In the middle of all this, we were going around trying to make people laugh.
Maybe that's act one in your showbiz career. Act two was when you and Tim went your own ways, and you were working the comedy store, sometimes living in an automobile, struggling like all comedians, and struggling, by the way, in great company with Letterman and Leno and Billy Crystal and Freddie Prinze and all those guys. And your big break was getting on the Tonight Show.
Yeah, when the team split up, it broke my heart. I didn't know what I was going to do. I never wanted the team to split up. I thought we could become the greatest comedy team in America was my goal. And the team split up. It's in the book. Tim had a problem and he ended up running off with a woman in the West Coast and who influenced him greatly. And the team split up. And we're still the best of friends to this day. We wrote a book together, and now there's talk about maybe Netflix doing a mini series about Tim and Tom, having a young guy play me and a young guy play Tim, of what we endured back in the day. So the team split up, and I decided to go it alone. I ended up on the West Coast. My wife wanted me out of show business. She hated show business from day one, and I don't blame her. She didn't marry a guy in show business. She married a guy just out of the service, and she wanted a check every Friday to help feed our kids. Show business is such a precarious life. So, but I had the bug, and I wanted to be in show business. So I decided to go it alone. I ended up on the West Coast again because Johnny Carson was out here. And the way to get to Johnny Carson was get to the Comedy Store. There was no improvisation or no Laugh Factory in those days out there, just the Comedy Store on Sunset Boulevard, the hottest place in town. Every night someone was getting discovered at the Comedy Store. But it was the way to get to the Tonight Show was get them to come and see you there. So it took a while. I ran out of money. I had no place to stay. I ended up sleeping in an old Nash Rambler that was up on blocks. It wasn't my car. It was up on blocks, and the front seat came down. You could sleep in it. I'd wash up at a gas station every morning and hitchhike up and down Sunset Boulevard, trying to drop off pictures and bios to get people to represent me. I couldn't get anybody to represent me. But I finally got onto the Comedy Store. It took me 30 days. I auditioned for the woman that owned it, Mitzi Shore, and she liked what I did and gave me a regular time slot. I worked there for a while. I ended up going back to Chicago, convincing my wife and kids to come back and be with me, and for me to try to make it out here. But I finally got the Tonight Show to come and see me. And I got to the Tonight Show after about 8 months in LA. And I scored that night. What happened, although first of all, I got bumped 3 times. Every time you go there, they ran out of time. I'd get put in makeup, go to my dressing room, come down to the green room. We ran out of time. Come back next week. I'd come back next week in makeup, go to my dressing room, down the green room. We ran out of time. 3 times. The 4th time I'm there, I'm in the dressing room getting made up, and the makeup room. I'm sorry, in the makeup room, and the producer Fred DeCordova came in there and he said, "I got bad news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "You're going on tonight." And now a big lump gets in your throat. 26 million people watch that show. So when you did the Tonight Show, your whole life changed. Not only did 26 million people watch the show, but talent coordinators for all the hotels in Las Vegas watch that show. Talent coordinators from all the TV shows watch that show. And not only that, my mother had everybody back in Harvey, Illinois watching. So if I bomb, I can't even go back home. So anyhow, I'm behind that curtain, and they walk me around, and "Are you ready?" I said, "Yeah, I'm ready." And they leave me alone, and Doc Severson's playing. They're in commercial break, and all of a sudden the music stops and your heart stops, and you hear Johnny say, "We're back now, and I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight, because my next guest is making his first appearance on the Tonight Show. Will you welcome, please, Tom Dressen?" One great line: "I'm glad you're in such a good mood tonight." That sets
you up.
And I walked out there, and they open up the curtain, you walk out. I couldn't see the audience, the bright lights. It's like you're in an operating room, and there's a mark on the floor. I hit my mark, and I did my first joke, and it got a laugh. I did my second joke, it got a laugh. I did my third joke. Now I hear Johnny and Ed McMahon laughing behind me. Now I'm on a roll. I kept getting applause. I end up with 8 applause. Johnny called me back out for a second bow. And the coordinator come running. He said, "Go back out." I went back out. I never stopped working from that day. I started doing Dinah Shore, Merv Griffin, Mike Douglas, Johnny Carson, Midnight Special, rock concert, Soul Train, American Bandstand. I was the only white comedian to ever go on Soul Train. I was doing $20,000 Pyramid, Hollywood Squares, Match Game, touring with Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy took me on the road for 3 years. All of a sudden, everybody wanted me. Natalie Cole, Gladys Knight and the Pips, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Avalon, James Darren, Mac Davis, Tony Orlando, and Don. Everybody wanted me because they wanted a comedian who could work clean and not offend their audience. So I was just working all the time. And again, I've never stopped working since that night.
Well, it's funny because the one and only time I got to talk to Frank after a show one day, and I complimented him a little, but I knew I had to get away from that quickly. And I said, "And Tommy was great." And he just said, "Tommy's terrific." And he said, "And he's clean." Notice there were no swearing. If we had more time, I'd love to ask you, what the Pips were like, because, they don't get a lot of publicity, but touring with Liza and Sammy Davis had to be fabulous. But I don't know if you've ever been asked this question. You're asked what Frank Sinatra is really like and all that, but what do you think Frank Sinatra thought of Frank Sinatra?
Well, he knew after a while what a legend he was. I mean, he knew, but he said something so humble to me one time on the plane. We were talking about the show that night and the music as it is today. And he said, "I don't care if Frank Sinatra name lives on. I hope the music will live on."
There's a day we're both going to always remember, May 14th, 1998, because that was the day that Frank died. It was the day I got diagnosed with cancer, and I was getting, that was before emails, and I was getting, voicemails, faxes all around from people saying, "We're sorry about Frank." You knew the day was coming, because you had visited him many times after he stopped performing 3 or 4 years earlier. But if the boy from Harvey, Illinois, was a pallbearer and spoke at Frank's funeral, and really now I think you're probably the lead spokesman for Frank in his life and his career, because you're one of the few people that's sort of the bridge from those days to the present.
Yeah. Well, I knew there was an end of an era, Scott. All the years that I toured with Frank Sinatra, I turned down more sitcoms than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. And every time they give me the opportunity, I thought, nah, I'm in 45, 50 cities a year, staying in Frank's home. Besides that, I was playing golf on a Celebrity Players Tour. If you were a 10 handicap or below, I was playing golf on a Celebrity Players Tour. We had, sports celebrities and show business celebrities, Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. We had 42 Hall of Famers. Show business, me, Matt Lauer, Brian Gumble, Eddie Marinero, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Avalon. I'm going going and competing in 12 different cities a year with these athletes. If somebody had told me when I was a little boy, one day you're going to get inside of an arena and you're going to compete with the greatest athletes who ever lived in your lifetime, I'd say that's impossible. I couldn't do that, but I was doing it in a golf arena. If somebody told me when I was shining shoes, you hear that voice on that jukebox, one day you'll fly all, he's singing, come fly with me. One day you're going to fly with him all over the world. I said, it's impossible, but I was doing those things. And Christopher Morley, the author, once said, success is living the life you want. So I was living the life I wanted. You know, I wanted to be with Frank. Again, I turned down more opportunities because every time that they would offer me, the networks would offer me to get with an ensemble group and do a sitcom, it would mean I had to quit touring with Frank. And I knew it was the end of an era. And I wanted to be there till the last. And I was till the very last.
But Tommy, I know you have other commitments. So I just want to ask you two final questions.
Sure.
The first is, and you write about being diagnosed, you had appendix cancer in 2013. It returned in 2016. I knew about it the first time. I did not know it returned until one night you were kind enough to come to a Hippocratic Cancer Research Foundation day with me, and you told the whole group how it had come back. And the first doctor basically told you to get your affairs in order. And of course, being that stubborn guy from Harvey, you're not going to do that. You took a different approach. And I'm just wondering if you could tell people, because so many people are battling cancer, just a couple of your tips on surviving and getting through that.
Well, what happened was, as you know, appendix, getting colonoscopies all the time, and they had to find a polyp to remove it. And then one time I came to, and the guy said, the doctor said, there's a polyp on your appendix and I can't get to it. I have to do surgery. He took the appendix out and told me it was stage 3 cancer on the growth on the appendix. And he said, you know, I recommend, he said, if 100 people had what you had, he said 60 could walk out the door and never be a reoccurrence, but 40% there's a slight opportunity for something microscopic slipping through. I recommend you take chemo. And I took chemo for 6 months as a precautionary. And I never lost my hair. I never missed a gig. I never missed a round of golf. No one knew that was going to, and I didn't tell anybody. Because, and I'll tell you, and I'll tell you why I didn't tell anybody. I'll tell you about the second time, then I'll tell you why I didn't tell anybody. Remind me why I didn't tell anybody. But then years go by, and I ended up getting a physical. I felt some discomfort in my abdomen, and wasn't anything painful or anything. And my doctor said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. He was checking me, everything. And then I went to the doctor who did the surgery on me the first time, and he checked. He said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. About a week later, I said, something's wrong. I went back to my doctor and I said, Doc, he said, well, I got to give you a CAT scan. I can't tell. He calls me 2 days later. I'm driving down Ventura Boulevard on my way to my daughter's house. Tom, he said, Dr. Wolfsberg. I said, hey, Doc, how you doing? He said, Tom, this is the part of my job that I hate. Now, I pull over to the side, said, what are you talking about? He said, go see your oncologist right away. He said, your cancer's returned. Now I get my daughter, my oncologist had retired. So I go to the USC, these famous oncologists, and they looked at the charts and everything. I brought my daughter with me. I told my daughter, they're probably going to tell me to put me on chemo again, and I can handle that. And anyhow, the doctor turned around, him and a woman doctor and a male doctor, they were looking at the screens, and he turned around and he said to me, Mr. Dressen, go home and get your affairs in order. And my daughter gasped. And I said, are you telling me that I'm going to die? He said, yes. I said, how much time do I have? He said, only God knows that. I said, well, I'm going to ask God for a second opinion. I'm not, he said, well, I like your attitude. But he said, it's apoptotic carcinomatosis. It's you know, fatal and blah, blah, blah. So I came home, my daughter, I got a hold of a buddy of mine named John Romeo, who's from Chicago, but he lives out here. He wrote for Jay Leno for years. And my nephew, Kerry Polizzi from Chicago, and his wife, my 2 daughters, my road manager, Brandon, and they all became my support team. And now they were going to research all over the world, look into Israel, look into Germany, anywhere with, you know, Argentina. Is there anybody doing anything on this specific cancer? Best we could come up with, there were 2 doctors in the United States that could do this thing. There was a guy in Chicago too named Pappas, Dr. Pappas, wonderful guy at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke. Anyhow, but I went and visited him and talked to him. And he also talked about out my area, Dr. Lowy, Lowy. And we called a sugar baker in DC, and he said, no, I won't do the surgery because you're too old. He said, I wouldn't work on a guy half your age. It's like a 10-hour surgery. He said. Anyhow, the only one left was this Dr. Lowy. My good friend Clint Eastwood fixed me up with MD Anderson and a doctor there named Curie, who I was communicating with on anything recent. And I called him and I said, I'm told there's a Dr. Lowy in San Diego that might be able to perform a surgery. He said, Tom, he trained here at MD Anderson. Do you want us to call him for you? I said, oh, please. I'm down 48 hours later. I'm down in San Diego. Dr. Lowy looked at my charts and everything. He said, I got to do a laparoscopy first. If I can't help you, I don't want to do surgery on you and weaken you for whatever time you have left. He looked at the laparoscopy and said, I think I can do something here. And the week before I go into surgery, I'm playing in the AT&T. I'm not feeling bad. I'm playing the AT&T in the Pebble Beach thing every year for Clint Eastwood. I'm performing up there and playing. And a week later, I'm in surgery, 7.5-hour surgery. I came out of it's a surgery called HIPEC, HIPEC, which is an acronym. And basically what they do, they go in and get all the cancer out they can, and then they flush that area with chemo, like they call hot chemo. And it's like 400 times more effective. Anyhow, long story short, I come to, and he said, we got it all. You're disease free. And I said, Doc, you saved my life. You're a genius. He said, no, I'm not. I'm stubborn. But I found out later that he painstakingly took like 200 tiny tumors out of my abdomen, one at a time, and then flush it out. Now, can it reoccur? Yes. But right now I've had 4 scans and it hasn't. So I'm optimistic. And here's what I tell everybody, why I never told anybody. When I walk into a room, my whole life, I always want to make people feel good, laugh. Hey, there's Tommy. When I go to my country club, the first thing those guys will say to me is, all right, what's the joke of the day? What's going on? I always made them laugh. Now, if they all knew I was battling cancer, they're going to look at me with them puppy eyes, right? I want to make you laugh. That's what I'm all about, And then I'll in this with this, I give motivation talks. And part of my motivation, the first thing when I heard I had this, when I came home, when everybody left my house, I was all alone. I went in the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and I said, now you've been talking motivation almost all your life. Now you're going to have to listen to your own words or you're a hypocrite. But you've been lying to those people all these years. Because one of the things I used to say to them that the day that I began to live, that I truly started to live, was the day that I totally embraced the fact that one day I was going to die. I said, now we all say, oh, we know that, we put it on the back burner. But when you totally embrace the fact that one day you're going to die, then you have a choice. You can live every day until you die, or you can die every day until you die. So I chose that I was going to live every day until I die. And right now I'm living every day until I die. Being with you, Scott, might be the highlight. It could be all downhill from here.
Well, Tom, I have to tell you, you have made people happy so many times over the years from, the work that you do in comedy. You've helped so many people because nobody has lent their name and talent to more worthwhile charitable causes than you. And you light up the people around you because you truly are one of the nicest, most down-to-earth, caring people anybody could ever want to meet. And so I always wondered what it would be like to be a celebrity because, wherever you go, whether you're in a good mood or you're bad mood, people know who you are. And people always love when they see Tom Dressen coming in their direction because laughter and life is in store for them. And you're a national treasure. And I can't wait to see what the next chapter is going to be because I know you still have a lot more to do. I don't know what you're currently working on other than, the Netflix movie, but they're going to speed up the slides a little bit. And one of these is my favorite picture because it's a picture of me opening for you, which was the highlight of my career. Here it is right here. And it was a tremendous thrill. And thank you so much for joining us and for doing something other than talking about either the law or insurance.
Well, I'm glad to be here. And as you know, I always say whenever there's lawyers in the audience, I don't do lawyer jokes because lawyers don't think they're funny and the audience doesn't think they're jokes.
Tom Dressen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Scotty. My best to Shire. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.